Hello everyone, and welcome to my horror tour. My name is David, I will be your guide today, and I'm broadcasting for SANDEMANs. I'm also known as Australian David. Now, I've been a tour guide here for 8 years all up, doing horror tours, doing general history tours, doing castle tours, and also doing Harry Potter tours, and Arthur's Seat tours. And I love it all to pieces, but as I've mentioned a little earlier, if you were around, I'm originally from Australia. I came here in 2013 after I finished my degrees in performing arts acting and criminology and forensic science, for I had a choice. Do I be an actor or do I be a detective? And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something different first. So I came here to Edinburgh after doing a European trip. As I was going through Europe, I actually went on quite a few SANDEMANs tours. I then thought, you know what, I need to make some money. So I came here to Edinburgh and I got myself a job as a tour guide. History was a big hobby of mine. Of big groups of people having so much fun. Being a tour guide is a very rewarding job. You get to show off beautiful places and you get to meet a lot of great people. And at the end of the day though, I thought I was going to return to Australia. Now this is the horror tour. I'm going to tell you what happened to me. I met a woman, I got married, and I got stuck here, but don't feel too much sympathy. It was my choice in the end. You see, I still love Edinburgh, I still love my job, and I still love my wife. They're the main things. Now, during the pandemic, we had to find new ways of bringing this tour to you, and this is one of the ways, by live broadcasting. You guys will get to walk around with me, and you can enjoy the city from the comfort of your own home. We're also joined by some very special guests. The St Christopher's Inn, they're joining us today. They're sharing this to get more people out there. St Christopher's Inn, they have really affordable accommodation in the centre of the city, and this is not just in Edinburgh, this is all over the place. I've been to, my favourite one was the one, well, I've been to the one here, really loved it. I also love the one in Prague. St Christopher's Inn is amazing. So if you're going to travel to the city, do check them out. But now let's get the horror tour started. And by the way, close. Now close is short for enclosure. Everything close together. This goes back to the time when Edinburgh was a walled-in city. It was in 1517 they finished the Flodden Wall, which went all the way around the south of the city. It went all the way around the south and the east of the city. We also had the Norlock on the north, and at the west was the castle. Now the Norlock was a massive swamp. They used to throw their toilets out the window, and it all had to go somewhere, so it came down the closes and filled up the valleys. Well, that was a pretty terrible place to be, the Norlock, and by the way, there was no threshold to the Norlock. You'd throw your toilet out the window, it'd go all the way down, fall in. Now, on a wet day, if you're walking down one of those really narrow streets, and the stairs you saw then, they're a new invention. They were just narrow slopes, and on a wet day, they became slides. You could fall over and slide right into the Norlock. Now, the city started to expand upwards and inwards, and the coal smoke died. The reason why these buildings are so black, the old coal smoke. Then they started taxing people every time they tried to leave, and the commoners could not afford this tax. And that caused generation after generation of people who lived here in Edinburgh who could never leave the city's walls. And they believed everything outside the city walls was the world's end. There's nothing out there but death and a place called England. That's where the English come from, and they don't like the English. Now you might be walking down the beautiful Royal Mile. It's the middle of the night, you're a little bit drunk, then a big gust of wind comes across the Norlock, and it blows all the methane gas onto the Royal Mile. And high amounts of methane gas makes you hallucinate. That's suddenly when people start seeing fairies around the Royal Mile. They start hearing ghosts coming out of the closes. Now I want to tell you the story of the ghost of Johnny One Arm, one of the more famous ghosts which haunt the closes here. Now, the closes, they had to be at least one coffin wide, and even during the day, they were very dark. Johnny One-Arm, John Cheesley. It is in 1680, and he wants to divorce his wife and children. There is no divorce up here, but there was divorce down in England after what King Henry did to his wives. So he takes his wife and children to court and gets what's called a legal separation. Now, the judge of the case, Lockhart, grants him the legal separation, but says, you now owe your former wife £84 a month, which Cheesley found outrageous. He's now going to be destitute. He was a nobleman with a lot of money, and all his money is now going to go to his former wife and children. One day, well, it was a couple of weeks later actually, when Lockhart was walking down one of the closes here, Cheesley came out from behind him and shot him in the back of the head. Now, people heard the gunshot, but he didn't care. He just wanted to get revenge on Lockhart. Now, he's arrested and sentenced to be tortured and hanged. They brought him here to the Mercat Cross. This is actually the new Mercat Cross. But they brought him here to the Mercat Cross. And what they did is they put him in a device called wooden boots, which crushes your toes. And as they're crushing his toes, he just starts laughing. They start crushing his fingers. He continues to laugh. They chop off the arm that he used to kill the judge, then puts the gun around his neck, and when they hang him, they wave the arm in front of his face as a mocking goodbye. The last thing he lets out is a little chuckle. It's hilarious. His body was then meant to remain right here at the Mercat Cross for 7 days, but on the third day, his body vanishes. Where did it go? As they're in dark corners here in Edinburgh, they're walking down narrow closes, and suddenly they hear laughter from behind them, and to them, that's John Cheesley. He's stalking them, and as time went on, they started calling him Johnny One-Arm. In 1980, they were renovating a place in Dalry, north of the city. And they pulled up the floorboards, and they found a skeleton that was missing its right arm and had a gun chained around its neck. Now, it turns out Cheesley's brother lived there, so the case is solved. On the third day, his brother took him down and gave him a burial. But this story of Johnny One-Arm stalking the streets of Edinburgh is still a big part of Edinburgh folklore. I also want to say hello to Michelle, who just came in. I think also hello to Jenny, and welcome to Diana. Now, one thing I did forget to say at the start is, if you're really enjoying this tour and you're really enjoying what I'm doing, one of the ways you can support me is by donating to my PayPal. Now, I'm doing this tour for you guys, and it's up to you whether you think this tour is worth me being paid for. That money's going to go back to me and my wife. It's going to help support me during this really tough time being a tour guide. Obviously, there's not as much tourism as there used to be. It is slowly coming back though, so it is recovering, and we are doing live tours again. But if you do like this tour, again, please pay what you feel this tour is worth to you at the end. And I will be plugging that again later on, so don't worry, I will remind you. But now, we're going to go up to the original execution spot here in Edinburgh. And by the way, as this tour goes on, if you've got any questions, people, just ask. Go straight ahead and ask. Now, the heart of Midlothian. This was the first execution spot. Now, there wasn't a heart here, but there used to be a heart on the tax office door, where this car park is today. It doesn't look like much, but you can sort of see on the ground, you can see the outline of where the old toll booth used to be, the tax office. You see, there's two things in life that are guaranteed, and that is death and taxes. So it seemed really appropriate to kill people in front of the tax office door. There was a big sort of heart on the door, and the locals would spit on it to sort of stick it to the man. When they brought the old toll booth down, they decided to put a heart out here to symbolise the execution spot, and the locals still spit on it. This is also where they brought out a device called the Maiden, which is similar to a French guillotine, where they strap you down, they drop the blade, but unlike the French guillotine, the Maiden had a flat blade, so it took about 4 or 5 shots before you got it through the neck. The last man to be executed by the Maiden was a man called Godfrey McGulloch. It took 5 swings to get his... When his head fell to the ground, it started to scream, and his body got up and ran for it. Now, people have reported a headless ghost running down the mile. They've also reported hearing screams coming from the heart of Midlothian. Any haunted hotels? I'll tell you, all the ones that are down near the bridges, they always claim to be haunted. Now, I'll get more into the bridges later on, but that's where the underworld of Edinburgh used to be. That's where they built up the original vaults. The vaults were storage spaces that no one used, so that's where the homeless people moved in, and then came the illegal gambling dens and brothels. And I get to show off a few of the bridges in a little bit. But now I want to talk about this beautiful building right behind me. St Giles Cathedral. We know there's been a church here since around 850 and became St Giles Cathedral in 1232. St Giles being the patron saint of lepers and cripples. Now it's here where the Covenanters were born. The Covenanters were a Presbyterian sect of the Scottish Church who were against the Anglicans. You see, the kings believed that they had divine right, that there's God, the king, and everyone else. The Presbyterian Covenanters were like, no, that's not how it works. King Charles I, he tried to change the prayer books here. An old lady called Jenny Geddes came in, and she's been reading the exact same prayers all her life, and suddenly they've changed. Some of them are even hymning more to the king. And so she got up, picked up her chair, and threw it straight at the minister. And that act of defiance started the Covenanters. The Covenanters, they actually were happy to pay their taxes. They were happy to be part of the king's army. They just weren't happy with the king. And obviously the king found this treasonous. Not more than one king found it treasonous. Now they went underground and every now and then popped up, but it all came together in the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1678. Now I'll get into what happened during the Battle of Bothwell Bridge a little later on in the tour. But now we're heading a bit further up the mile. I'm going to flip around the camera. Now one thing you might have noticed about Edinburgh, well, it is a beautiful city, but it was never meant to be beautiful. It was actually built to scare off English people. We are very, very close to the borders here. Now, you didn't want a city that the English are going to see and go, oh, this is right for the taking. You want a city that looks scary and intimidating. And I feel that's why Edinburgh really has that dark feel to it. I'm going to just jog across the road real quick. The lights didn't last for very long. I always loved how gothic these buildings are, with the sharp roofs on the top. But now I've got to show off the last public execution spot here in Edinburgh. Now, I say public because there were still executions after it. Now, technically, I actually believe it was just across the road over there, depending on which book you read, on that corner. The thing about Edinburgh's history is I read it in 5 different books and it came out 5 different ways. And by the way, that's St Giles Cathedral there with a nice crown-shaped tower at the top. It's a beautiful building that I was pointing out earlier, but here's a different view. But now, Deacon Brody. Now you can see he's got a dual face. Just like I always see Edinburgh, both a beautiful city and a horror city, a city with a dual personality. There's the upper section and the lower section, where there was great authors and great writers, and also great criminals. Now he was an 18th century nobleman who inspired one of the great literary characters of our time. And by the way, this pub itself is pretty cool, the Deacon Brody Tavern. Now he lived just across the road, I'm going to walk past it, in what we now call Brodie's Close. He was respected by the community. He had a family, he had a wife, he was a cabinet maker, he was also a locksmith. go down to the Grassmarkets. That's where he had 2 other wives. Now, to fund this dual lifestyle, he used to rob the houses he made locks for as a locksmith. So this is where he used to live, and we now call it Brodie's Close. Now, to continue on, the police are baffled. There's all these burglars without forced entry. So they decide to hire a master of locks to find another master of locks. They actually hired Deacon Brody to find himself. Well, he had a blast. On the nights he wasn't burglarizing places and drinking and gambling, he was searching for himself, and even though he never found himself, he could deem it successful because that burglar wasn't stealing anything when he was around. But the problem was, his ego got the better of him. He thought he was a master criminal. He got together a group of hoodlums to rob the tax office. Now that was a big bungle. He actually got away, but quite a few of the hoodlums were captured. Deacon Brody knows they're going to give him up. So he ran over to Amsterdam. He then wrote a letter to one of his former wives saying, hey, oh, and don't worry about being late. You can still enjoy the tour. Thank you for coming. Now, he's over in Amsterdam and he writes a letter to his wife saying, well, one of his wives saying, hey, I'm going to go sail to America. I'm going to start a new life there. You want to join me? Well, she heard about the other 2 wives and gave him up to the police. He's arrested, brought back here, and hanged up here in the lawn markets. There was a young man in the crowd, a young lawyer, who recently bought a cabinet off Deacon Brodie. It was made by Deacon Brodie. He decided to make that a family heirloom. So he passed it down, and it made it all the way to his great-grandson, who was Robert Louis Stevenson. And Robert Louis Stevenson wrote The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now let's flip this around as we go down this narrow close. Now, closes, as I mentioned, had to be at least way you can get their body out without people knowing. You can also see they have to put in the artificial light. Even during the day, this place is, these closes are very dark. I also want to show you something else, which is, I find, quite a bit scary. Just imagine you come home late at night, you're really drunk, and you're walking up your stairs in the dark, and you have to remember something. You have to remember where your trip step is. Now, you can see how that middle step there is cut short. That's what's known as the Scottish trip step, or the Scottish burglar alarm. It's the middle of the night, someone has broken into your house, but he does not know that one of your steps is cut short. So when he puts his foot down, he slips and goes, ah! i.e. the Scottish burglar alarm. It's a little hard to see, but it's the one right there in the middle, the short one. Quite effective against burglars, also quite effective against tenants who've come home drunk and they can't remember which one their trip step is. Now, that hurt the tenants of the house way more than it ever hurt a burglar. Let's continue on. And again, any questions, do let me know. Yep, the tunnel's in between buildings. The closes. Now right here is the beautiful Writers' Museum. And by the way, this is Wardrop's Court. It is a 16th century court. Sorry, 17th century court. You know how 1700s are the 18th century? It always confuses me. But this is a 17th century court. Now the Writers' Museum, a lot of very famous authors have come out of Edinburgh, such as Sir Robert Louis Stevenson, who I mentioned earlier, who wrote The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One of my personal favourites is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who wrote Sherlock Holmes. Now he said he based Sherlock Holmes on one of his professors in Edinburgh University, a man called Professor Joseph Bell. There's a big mythology behind Joseph Bell, but Joseph Bell always claimed that it was never him. it was always Arthur. Arthur is the true Sherlock Holmes. In fact, Arthur got a call from London. They wanted him to look into the Whitechapel murders, better known as the murders done by Jack the Ripper. He heads down south. He conducts an investigation. Hello, you can see someone else saying. Yes, you can. Hello.
We're the cool people.
Apparently they're cool, take their word for it.
I mean, technically,
Okay, now continue on, thank you. Now, back on to Jack the Ripper. Let these guys, well, okay. Now he goes down south, let these guys say. Hey guys.
Is this a vlog?
No.
Oh, what is it for?
It's a live stream.
Oh, hello. Hello. How many viewers have you got?
Sorry?
How many viewers?
I can't quite tell, but I think quite a few actually.
Crack on, my man.
See you later.
Edinburgh.
See ya.
Come to Edinburgh.
Yep. Cutting out of it. Oh, sorry about that. Yes, as I said, I am David the Ghost. As soon as I get to more lively areas, things do cut out a little bit. Anyway, back to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle investigating Jack the Ripper. Now, this all happened down in the East End of London near the Jewish Quarter. Now, the Jewish women back then used to wear big black wigs, and I'd sometimes be seen with aprons on with blood all over them. It was their job to slaughter the chickens. Now, he surmised that Jack the Ripper would disguise himself as a Jewish woman, commit the crime. If anyone ever spotted him, he didn't look out of place. That was just a Jewish woman who recently slaughtered an animal. They did find a few burnt wigs and aprons in the area. He also came up to his conclusion of who Jack the Ripper is and gave that to the police, but the police never made it public. And I always thought the original Sherlock Holmes did look into Jack the Ripper. Now, a little earlier I mentioned Johnny One Arm. One second. Now, apparently the murder of George Lockhart took place at this close. Well, according to one book I read. So, maybe that's where the ghost of Johnny One Arm walks down and laughs at people. Was Jack the Ripper Peter... Okay. I'm not entirely sure which suspect you're referring to. From what I understand, according to DNA evidence, they actually think it was a Polish barber. Though off the top of my head, I can't remember the name. It came out in 2016 that they found the DNA of a Polish barber on two of the victims. However, there's been a lot of dispute saying whether it's actually possible for the DNA to last that long. But the thing I should tell you, about Jack the Ripper is he has to remain anonymous. There's too much tourism, there's too many book sales, there's too much mythology. If the case is ever solved, well, yeah, it's not going to be as interesting. Actually, something I did forget to put up. This is what a friend of mine did. This is his rendition of Johnny One Arm. Maybe Johnny One Arm haunts one of the closest here. But now, turn things around. First of all, I'll point out the valley where the Norlock used to be. The massive swamp. Nowadays it's the Princess Street Gardens. There's also the mound right there. When they were building the new town, all the rubble they put right here and it made a mound. Not the most creative, that's why they call it the mound. Also the Sir Walter Scott monument, a big Gothic looking rocket. The man who actually built that was thinking he was, who designed it, was thinking he was designing a cathedral in Glasgow. So that's why it does look very cathedral-like. And talking about cathedrals and religion, right behind me is the new college. Beautiful building. It's new because it goes back to 1846, and that is relatively new for Edinburgh. If you come on one of our day tours here in Edinburgh, you can actually, and it's during the week, you can actually get to step inside and see the courtyard. Sorry guys.
They're pretty.
But now let's continue up. Now, thank you for the thank you about that. A friend of mine's really good at his artistic stuff. Actually, because I'm doing a lot at once, I should also show off Deacon Brody. There's always a lot you got to keep in mind. Now, Deacon Brody, funny enough, the houses he was robbing were actually over there in the new town. That's where he made most of the locks for. The new town. And the old town as well. The Norlock here, I keep going back to the cesspit. When they started draining the Norlock and making it into the beautiful St Giles Gardens you see today, they came across a lot of skeletons. Now that was mainly due to the Scottish witch trials. They had a great way to tell whether a woman was a witch or not. What they would do is they'd tie their thumb to their toes, sorry, doing a bit of a shuffle with my hands here. They'd tie their thumb to their toes and throw them into the Norlock. Now, if the women drowned in the Norlock... Oh, where do you work, Ross? Let me know. If the women drowned in the Norlock, they were good Christians you sent to heaven. You have done the right thing. If the women floated, they were witches, because the water is denying them because they denied their baptism, which means bring them in and set them on fire. Do the right thing. Now, if you threw them in, they sunk to the bottom, untied themselves and swam back up again. That's not a result. So you got to chuck them in again until you get a result. Now, the thing about the witch trials is that they all had something very similar about them. It's when a new king or political leader had come to power and they needed to prove themselves. And the best way to prove yourself is to pick a fight with someone and win. So you got to make sure you pick a fight with someone you know you're going to beat. So pick a fight with your own people, particularly women. Say that there are witches investing the land, and it's up to you, the king or the religious leader, the priest, to rat them all out, to do God's work. Every woman being burnt at the stake technically made the leader a better leader. Now I'm going to quickly show you a nice view. I'll get more into the witch trials in just a second. But here is the new town. On a nice little angle. Now it might be a little hard to see. I'm going to see if I'm going to focus it in a little bit. But I want to show you the big disasters. Are they related to the... Yes. The Salem witch trials. A lot of people who started the Salem witch trials were actually Scot. I think it was there was a Scot and an Englishman who were both part of the witch trials. It did happen down in England just a little bit earlier, and it also happened over in it also happened in Denmark. The Danish also had them, and a lot of the people they brought that across with them. So yes, there is a relation. Before I go further into the witch trials, I want to talk about a recent shame of Edinburgh, something that they built, which it was quite upsetting. They built this last year. It was the new St James Centre, which is affectionately called the Edinburgh Poo Emoji. I'm going to see if I can point it out. It's going to be very bad, but it's right there. Right where my finger is. Focus is going to be terrible. But that is the Edinburgh Poo Emoji. If you're still watching out there, you know what I'm talking about. The big poo emoji on top of the city. Now, there have actually been petitions to say, hey, please put big googly eyes on it, so at least we can have a laugh at it. So yeah, the Edinburgh poo emoji. Anyway, on to the witch trials as we head up this road. We're actually heading up towards the castle. Now, one of the more famous women to be accused of witchcraft was Lady Glamis. She was a noblewoman who married the Earl of Glamis in 1528, and this is during the reign of King James V. And James V doesn't like two things, and that is women and Douglases. Lady Glamis's name was Janet Douglas. Now, when her first husband died, the king accused her of poisoning him. He did die of an illness. By the way, this is Ramsgates Gardens, a very rich area of Edinburgh. I actually love it. The design is great and so suspicious. I can't wait for it to open, and I can't get some decent. Okay, so Nikki actually really likes it. Anyway, when Lady Glams is accused of being a witch, well, not witch, like accused of killing her first husband, there wasn't enough evidence to convict her, so the king had to let her go. But James V was undeterred, and later accused her of being a witch. And they dragged her down to the dungeons of Edinburgh Castle. They didn't torture her, they actually brought her son into the cell next door and started torturing him. And that was too much for her. She confessed. They dragged her out to the castle Esplanade and set her on fire. Finally, I have justice. It was actually in death she became the witch of Edinburgh Castle. James started claiming to be haunted by her ghost, and royal family members have said to have encounters with the Witch of Edinburgh Castle, Lady Glams. This is all throughout the centuries. And that's a friend of mine's rendition of Lady Glams. Now, more about the witch trials. The height of the witch trials really picked up in 1606, when the play Macbeth came. The idea of witches and started his play with three women talking about a prophecy, and later they are dancing around a fire going, "Double, double, toil and trouble." Now they've seen witches on stage, people get really scared. Now in the height of the witch trials, well, it's really picked up in 1606, but it went from 1606 to 1630 was the real big height of it. And talking about height, that is the highest point of Edinburgh right there, the cross on the top of the hub. I'll point out how it's high a little later on, when we get close to the castle. But they started burning witches right here at the castle Esplanade. It became a pretty cool place to do it. Come see a woman get burnt alive on a Friday night, get your tickets. Now the thing about the witch trials is, it kind of just fell out of fashion. There was no uprising against them. It was in 1735 they passed an act in Parliament saying witches no longer exist because we killed them all. That was a great way of ending the witch trials. Then the witch trials in a way they didn't have to say sorry for. Now they've kind of said sorry. They put up the Witch's Well here. The Witch's Well is meant to be an apology for the women who died during the Scottish witch trials. A drinking well which doesn't work. And if you actually read the plaque on the wall, not this one, just pointing out the Witch's Well. If you actually read the plaque on the wall, there is no apology. It says evil purposes while others were misunderstood. So what they're saying is we're killing a lot of women back then. Some were good, some were bad, we don't know. Can you please not blame us? And they put that plaque up in 1978, so very recently. But now, let's head closer to the castle. The beautiful Edinburgh Castle. We know there's been a settlement here since around 850 BC. Though unfortunately we don't know much about the first settlers. When the Romans made it up here in the 1st century, the Romans wrote there was a small wooden fortification called Dun Eden up here. Dun being the Gaelic word fortification, and Eden being someone's name. They were not sure which Eden it referred to. The people living up here called themselves the Voldini, and they had 9 massive shrines to the 9 sisters. Now the most famous of the 9 sisters was Morgan le Fay. She was both a warrior goddess and a mother goddess. The funny thing is she was actually a combination of Morgurn and Morgana. She was later borrowed in the Arthurian legend and became King Arthur's half-sister. Now there was a big shrine to her up where Margaret's Chapel is today. Now the early Christians took down that big shrine to Morgan le Fay and then later put a chapel there to Christianize the site. And it's said since then that that has angered the goddess. And apparently she still haunts Edinburgh Castle. So if you're coming up here to Edinburgh Castle, you might encounter Morgan le Fay. You don't want to get on the goddess's bad side. Now, you can also see David's Tower, what's left of it. David's Tower used to be 3 times taller. Nowadays it's called the Half Moon Battery. It was actually the English who came up here in 1573 during the Lang Siege and bombarded it and took it down. Now in David's Tower, a very, very interesting dinner took place. And this goes back to 1437 when Edinburgh wasn't the capital, it was actually Perth at the time. Now the king, James I, he was assassinated while sitting on the toilet. A lot of kings were killed on the toilet back then. It's one of the few places you don't have your men surrounding you. After his murder, his 9-year-old son has to come to power, James II. James II wasn't old enough to rule in his own right. So he needs a regent, someone to rule in his place. The governor of Edinburgh Castle, a man called William Crichton, went, you know what? I'm the regent. Kidnapped the 9-year-old king, brought him here to Edinburgh, and got him down to Edinburgh as the new capital of Scotland. Now we've been the capital ever since. It's how we became the capital. We kidnapped a king. Let me see if I can adjust the brightness. There we go. Now, Crichton has lined it up. He's going to be the regent when he hears some bad news. The king's mother has remarried, and she's married a member of the Douglas clan. And William Douglas, the leader, who is 16 years old, is good friends with the king. No, sorry, he's 15, he's about to turn 16. The king has promised him, as soon as you're old enough to be the regent, you got the job. Well, Crichton couldn't have this. So he invites over William and his younger brother David over to Edinburgh Castle for a feast. And during the feast, the cook comes out with a severed bull's head, and he plants it on the table in front of the Douglas lads, a severed bull's head being a token of death. The Douglas lads know what this means, so they stand up and they draw their swords, but unfortunately that was their mistake. By drawing your sword at the dinner table, that is breaking hospitality. And because it's in front of the king, well, they also committed an act of treason. Maybe the Douglas lads would have got away with it if they just pushed away the severed bull's head and kept eating. But the Douglas lads were arrested, tried for treason, and executed. Both of their heads were sawn off. And they call this the Black Dinner. And for you Game of Thrones fans, that was the inspiration for the Red Wedding. Now, one more thing about the castle, just on a slightly nicer note, and I will show off the beautiful Arthur's Seat in a moment. You might have seen me up there like a couple of weeks ago. There's another ghost of Edinburgh Castle. Inside Edinburgh Castle, there is the dog cemetery. It's for the soldiers' dogs. The soldiers are allowed dogs as mascots, so when they die, they got full military burials. In 1960, a little boy went missing in David's Tower, climbing over a section he shouldn't have. He re-emerged a few hours later and said a big black dog let him out. There's a lot of mad people down there, but this big black dog, he showed me the way. Staff at Edinburgh Castle have said to have encounters with the big black dog, but they've all been positive encounters. They actually call him the good boy. So not all ghosts have to be scary. Some of them can be good boys. That's the end of that story. However, I might just leave his graphic up. I always love showing off the good boy. And just so you know, if you are Harry Potter fans, you should get a nice view of it from here. This is a horror tour, but you'll know what horror is. But anyway, just out there you can see the George Heriot School with a clock tower in the centre and 4 towers around it. J.K. Rowling, in her mind, picked it up and put it on Edinburgh Castle. And apparently that's where she got the idea of what Hogwarts was going to look like. The George Heriot School on top of Edinburgh Castle. We're going to head down from the castle. Let me just say goodbye to the good boy. Oh, Oh, and I accidentally flipped the camera around again. Not that I don't mind looking at my own face. But you might have seen me a couple of weeks ago. I was up at Arthur's Seat, doing the whole, like walking around those mountains there. Walking around the hills there. Arthur's Seat is beautiful. It's only about 45 minutes to get from the bottom to the top. Maybe in a couple of months' time, I'll go back up there again and do another live stream up there if people want it. With the legend being that Merlin, Arthur's wizard, came to the top and put 15 crosses up there, and only the purest of knights would get their horse to the top and tied. If you're not a pure knight, you would go insane. I also want to point out the highest point of Edinburgh, just there. That is the hub, which I mentioned earlier. Now, I might not look it from here, but that cross is taller than the castle flagpole. Now, it's hard to show you both perspectives just using my iPhone, but it is quite a bit taller. But now we're going to start heading off the castle esplanade, and just so you know, people there, ask me some questions along the way. I always like answering questions. Yeah, it is sunset and it is gorgeous. I know this is meant to be a horror tour, but we're now coming into summer and there's a lot of light hours, and I will tell you some great horror stories, but the backdrop's going to be gorgeous. And just so you know, it's something I can smell right now, if I can describe it. It smells like cooked popcorn, kind of a cooked oaty smell. Edinburgh has this beautiful smell. It comes from the breweries. Whenever the wind comes from the west, you can smell the cooked barley. Some people say it's popcorn, some people say it's oat biscuits, some people say it's Weetabix, which I in Australia say Weetabix. It is 9:40. It's going to start apparently sunset's not for another 10 minutes, and the twilight is really long here. So I doubt it's going to get dark at all, but not for at least another, I'd say, 40 minutes. Beautiful buildings, all nicely lit. We're also going to be walking past the Witchery. Obviously named because, this is very close to the place they used to burn the witches. There used to also be what's called a raggedy school just over here. It's a school for the people who can't afford normal school. Going back to the 19th century, they called them raggedy schools. Start heading off the mile. I want to start heading towards the beautiful Victoria Street. Now, I was there a little earlier. People pointed out the colours, and I told you a really nice story there. But there's a ghost which apparently haunts that street. They say at night a ghostly cart trots down it. What's your favourite food or beer? Greetings from New Scotland. Oh, you New Scotland? Wait, hold on. There's a few places actually that are called New Scotland. You over in Canada, are you? And the question: what is my favourite Scottish food or beer? My favourite beer is McEwan's, and 80%. That's my favourite Scottish beer. I also really like, even though. In terms of Scottish food, I love Scotland, and Nikki's going to hate me for saying this. I love Scotland, but I don't like the food. I just don't. The food here is all oily. It's all greasy, and I remember there was a famous thing I thought it was in the 90s. There was a microwave lasagna here, which actually had warning, traces of vegetable on it. That's how greasy the food is here. But then again, this place can get very, very cold. I know why they like their grease. But anyway, on to the story about the ghostly cart. Now, the ghostly cart that trots down Victoria/West Bow Street over here is said to be the cart of Thomas Weir. Major Thomas Weir. Scotland has great seafood. Point taken. Now, continue on. Major Thomas Weary. He lived in the west of Scotland before coming here to Edinburgh to retire to live with his elderly sister. He would go to church. He was quite old at this point, he's in his 60s. He'd go to church, he'd lead the sermons in prayer. He was, very well respected, being a retired army major. But people noticed he never knelt in front of the cross, nor would he ever let anyone into him and his sister's apartment. And he used to walk around with this big cane. He's in his old age now, his legs are not too good because he was in the army. And people would hear his cane ricketing up this street. Now one day, and I might cut out in the dark. Just while I'm under this section. So, I'll keep talking. Now one day, Major Thomas Weary, he's sitting up the back of church. And he gets up and says, "I've got a confession. I'm in league with Satan, and I'm having an affair with my sister." The crowd is baffled. That's not like him to say something like that. They ask him to sit down, but he continues, "No, it's true. We are in league with Satan. We do ritual sacrifices." Well, they think he's just going mad. So they decided to take him back to his house. He lived where the Caddies and Witchery Tours is today, a little further down. Now when they took him back to his apartment, they noticed that all the crosses were upside down. That's known as the satanic cross. They spoke to his sister, and his sister confessed that yes, they are having an affair, and they are in league with Satan. Sorry, I always get a little mesmerised by the colours of this street. Now, after that confession, they dragged them out of their apartment, where the Caddies and Witchery Tours is today. They took them down to the Grassmarkets and asked them to publicly confess, but they ignore that. Instead, they strip naked to shock the crowd. 1 second, I'll let the ambulance go past. Burnt at the stake here. Now the legend goes that Thomas threw his cane into the fire and it turned into a big snake, and it haunts Carlton Hill and it haunts this street. Also, another legend happened that Thomas was never actually burnt. Nice to...
Are you on Instagram Live?
No, I'm not Instagram Live, I'm just live streaming. You can say hello.
Hi there. What are you blogging about?
Well, I'm doing a horror tour.
A horror tour?
I'm not, that's not why I've got you here. I thought you were a nice person.
I'm a nice person.
Yeah, it's a horror tour. Oh.
Brilliant. A horror tour?
A horror tour.
I'm a nice person.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying, I'm doing a horror tour and I'm showing you. No, that's not what I meant. That's what I realised. Okay, but yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Take it easy. Anyway, to continue on. The legend goes that after he was, he never made it quite to the fire. A ghostly cart came, picked him up and took him away. And since then, people have reported his ghostly cart coming down this street. And they actually call him the Warlock of West Bow. Now, I love to come here late at night and hear those horses clopping down the street. Anyway, so I'm getting a lot of people looking at me at the moment. I may as well also show off the beautiful colours you can see behind me. It's getting really well lit up. In fact, let me just... around. It is really pretty here. But now, let's head to one of the most haunted graveyards. Well, actually, no, we'll go to the graveyard, but first of all, because we're down here, we got to check out the Grassmarkets. This is where two serial killers used to get their victims. two Irish lads called William Burke and William Hare. Now I might have to tell their stories a little bit further away because it is quite loud here. Sorry, let's go quiet then for a second. I saw two police officers running towards me and I thought, oh, am I in trouble? And then they just sort of casually walked past me. I'm like, wait. Someone else. Okay, anyway, that's why I just went remarkably quiet. To continue forward. Now, Burke and Hare, the serial killers, they came over here in the 1820s during the time of body snatching. Now, I'll get more into the body snatchers a little later on. But they worked at an inn down in Westport, and Westport is off in this direction. And by the way, you can see the very lively Grassmarkets. Yes, I do know there was someone being arrested right behind me, but I'm not going to dwell on that. I don't think he wants that to be live streamed. A bit of respect, and you know, they're just talking to... Okay, for context, I'll sneak up. They're just talking to him at the moment, okay? Everything's cool. Now, to continue forward, they come over here, they're working in an inn, and one night one of their tenants, an old man called Donald, is quite ill. Now, they go up to him, they see how he's doing, they just give him a bit of medicine, they say, you know what, you still owe us £4. Now by the morning, unfortunately, he was dead. He gave no information on how they'd get that money off him. So what are they to do? Well, it's body snatching time, so you know, this is when people are being sold to the medical school, so that seems like a school. And they sell to a very famous surgeon called Robert Knox. Now, Robert Knox was very impressed with the body. So impressed with the body that he gave Burke and Hare £7. That is about 5 months' wage back then. It was a lot of money.
Do you need a backup?
1 second.
Hello. Where are you from?
Oh, sorry, I flipped the camera around.
No, it's okay, I'm there.
Around to make it. There we are. I'm from Australia.
Oh, what about in Australia?
Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, I prefer Sydney, but Melbourne was nice. Oh, but
I'm not.
who are you talking to?
I'm talking to YouTube.
Oh.
It's actually live.
Oh.
What's your name, by the way?
I'm Gillian. Lovely to meet you. You
Lovely
have a
to meet you
fantastic
too.
night.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
You too. I can continue on. Wow. Okay, I will complete my lively area we're in. By the way, I think they're actually, that's a great, that's showing the people here. They're lively, they'll talk to you, they're very friendly. Anyway, back to the horrors of Burke and Hare. I'll get to a graveyard where it's a little quieter. Hopefully quieter. Anyway. After they sell the body to the very infamous Scottish anatomist and surgeon Robert Knox, they made £7 and they thought, this ain't too bad. A few weeks later, another one of the tenants, an old woman, was in bed and she was quite ill. Now, she had already paid up front, but they thought, you know what? She's dead anyway, so let's just help her out. Now, they can't stab her because that would mutilate the body. So they come up with a system we call Burking, where Burke would sit on the chest and Hare would put a pillow over their face, murdering them, but keeping the body pristine. So it's unmutilated, it is fresh. They took it to the medical school and made another £7. Now I'll continue the story in just a moment. I just want to point out the witch's wall. You can see all the ashiness here. When they were burning women at the stake, it turned out the ashes made beautiful mortar for the walls here. So if everyone's touched a victim of the witch trials, just touch this wall. I like to call this the witch's wall. But now we're heading into Greyfriars Kirk to finish the story. Now when Burke and Hare killed that woman, that's when they really become those criminals, the murderers. They are not body snatchers. They are serial killers. Now they start preying on homeless people, they're preying on prostitutes, but my favourite, they preyed on you guys, tourists, people who did not have family in town. Now, they would go to the Grassmarkets where you can see all those lively people. They'd come up and start talking until they hear someone with a foreign accent. Like me. I sounded very interesting to those people. And oh, you new to Edinburgh? Welcome to Edinburgh. 3 drinks on us. They get them nice and drunk, take them back to the lodge and kill them. The 16th victim was a prostitute called Margaret Doherty. She fought back ferociously when they jumped her. So much so that they ended up killing her with a chair leg, which opened up her skull and sprayed brain matter all over the floor. Now the body's been mutilated. Unfortunately, they can't sell it. So they kick her underneath the bed, they go back out onto the town, and a fellow prostitute realised that Margaret had not returned. So she decides she's going to look for her. She tracks her down to the inn, sneaks inside and finds Margaret underneath the bed. So she goes to the police. Burke and Hare are arrested. But unfortunately there's not enough evidence to convict them. So Hare gets a smart idea. He becomes crown witness and blames it all on Burke in exchange for a much lighter sentence. He only gets 2 months in prison. He's last sighted down in London as a blind beggar. As for Robert Knox, there's not enough evidence to convict him. They can't prove he knew the bodies where they can't prove he knew where the bodies were coming from. I might just get a little bit more into the light here. So, he's let off. They start singing this poem around the Royal Mile. Burke's the butcher, Hare's the thief. Knox is the man who buys the beef. And one day a little girl goes up to Robert Knox and goes, "You're the man who buys the beef." Which was too much for Robert Knox. He leaves the medical school and goes into a life of depression. And as for Burke, sorry, you couldn't see my face, so I'm just going to go to the beautiful cemetery. Burke was hanged in the lawn markets. They used his skin to bind medical books. They used his skeleton as a display skeleton. They also used his scrotum to make a coin purse. So that's what happened to Burke. And by the way, with that graphic on screen, technically, even though I say Burke and Hare, Burke is actually the one on the right, and Hare's the one on the left. But now we're in Greyfriars Kirk. This is a very old cemetery. Now this goes back to 1562. That's when Mary Queen of Scots opened it. Named for the Greyfriars, the monks that used to wear, well, not monks, sorry, someone corrected me once. They're actually not monks, they're more like, they're priests. There's a difference. But they used to wear big grey robes, and they would tend to the gardens here. It's a very old graveyard. You can see how this tombstone here is broken. And it also has what's called body stacking going on. They used to bury the bodies 6 foot deep into the ground until it got full. Then they buried them 4 foot deep. Then they buried them 2 foot deep. Then they sort of stuffed them in the best they could. Nowadays we call it the Edinburgh lasagna. Soil meat, soil meat, soil meat, soil. And one of the ways to remind you of that is the memento mori here, the skull and crossbones. That means death comes for everyone, be humble. In fact, there's a lot of Victorian Gothica all throughout this graveyard. In the Victorian era, there was the Second Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, like nowadays with the internet, we have so much more power over the land, over communication. It was just the same for them in the Victorian era during the Second Industrial Revolution. There was these things that they never saw before. We can now go to other countries a lot faster. We have steam engines. They then started thinking they had more power. Then also came out books such as Paradise Lost, which showed Satan in a very, very sympathetic light. And people started thinking that, hey, Satan ain't the worst person ever. He stood up to God. Maybe he's romantic. And that's when they started decorating their burial plots with the macabre, such as Screaming Face of Satan and Baby with Skull on Knee. Now, I'm not sure how well it's going to come out, but I might have to get the torch out of my bag. Well, it's coming out actually better than I thought, but you can also see, it's going to be a bit grainy, but you can see the King of Death there. It's a bit decayed, and 2 women swooning for him, in love with death. People actually thought because they had more control over the land, they had more control over the afterlife as well. This all ended during World War I, when people were seeing that technology can also bomb the hell out of places. Oh, sorry. So sorry, I forgot Burke and Hare in the corner. Completely forgot. Yeah, I'm going to get rid of the two dudes in the corner. I was focused so much on the Gothica here. Sorry about that. Now, to continue forward. Also, there's a lot of herb gardens here. Apparently herbs grown in graveyards taste really nice. I'm always wondering what's flavouring those herbs. Now, probably the grimmest part of Edinburgh's history is not that we have herb gardens in graveyards. It's that Edinburgh had the world's first ever concentration camp. That's where we had the Covenanters, and it was right here in Greyfriars Kirk. I'm walking towards it at the moment, so I'll show you when we get close. In the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1678, 1,000 of the King's forces. The King's forces were much, well, they were better armed, they were better disciplined. They slaughtered the Covenanters and brought 1,200 of them right here to Greyfriars Kirk. Now, they were looked over by a man called George Bloody Mackenzie. Now, I'm sorry, Shan, I'm going to bring up a dude just for a moment. I just want to show off another quick dude just for 1 second. Now, George Bloody Mackenzie, he would demand that the people lay face first in the mud for hours on end, and if you moved, they wouldn't kill side of you. So you are responsible for your neighbour's life. Now, he was the Lord Advocate, and out of the 1,200 brought here, only 400 of them survived, and they were sold as slaves to Barbados. Now, there's actually a tour going on in the Covenanters' prison, so I'm not going to say anything when I get closer to it. It's right through here. Now, I'm not going to go in because it'll be a little rude. That's where the Covenanters' prison used to be. Just past this gate. There are tours that go past and talk more about the Covenanters. Who you mean, Rebecca? Are they still there? The Covenanters? Good question. I'm not entirely sure. Some people claim to be descendants and still practice that sector of their religion. I believe so, but I can't give you a definite yes or no. But this is the Covenanters' prison. Now we're getting up towards the very, very end of the tour, so only two last things to quickly show you. First of all, George Mackenzie apparently still haunts this graveyard. Now, just over here where this tour group is the Black Mausoleum, where Mackenzie's body is. A homeless person actually broke inside in 1990, and he felt landed on the skeleton of George Mackenzie, which apparently woke up the ghost. And he haunts this graveyard. He attacks people by scratching their heads and scratching their arms. Now, the last story, very last story, is I want to tell you about the man who tried to exorcise Greyfriars Kirk, a man called Colin Grant. He was the head of the Spiritual Society here in Edinburgh in 1999, and he came here one night with a candle, and he is going to exorcise Greyfriars, so he's going to get rid of all the evil spirits here. He also brought with him a journalist from the Scottish newspaper. Now, he came up to this point just over here, and he started doing his ritual. Now, the journalist, he started taking photos. And I just want to show you a photo from that night. And that's the photo, and it's also the ghost photo. You can see in the window there is a dark figure right behind him. It's zoomed in on the top right-hand corner. So it's right here where he did it, and right there, when there actually kind of looks like there is, it almost looks like there is a face in that window. But anyway, after 2 hours of doing the ritual, there was no one inside Greyfriars Kirk at the time. Apparently eerie things were going on. You see the ghost photo there. Well, he stopped and said, no, I can't do this anymore. He blows out his candle, and then within the next couple of weeks, his health got worse and worse until unfortunately he passed away of a heart attack, with his wife claiming that the spirits of Greyfriars Kirk took him. That's the ghost photo from the night, and this is the window just up here. Let's get a little closer. Hopefully we don't see a face looking back at me. Is there a face in this window? Please, I don't want there to be a face in this window. Yep, no more ghosts. Okay, no more ghosts. Oh, there is a face in the... There literally is a face in this window. Awesome. On that note, we have come up to the end of the tour. So everyone, thank you so much for coming. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's been put into the chat. If you really did like this tour, and you love my presentation style, if you love this city as well, and the way I had to interact with the locals on a Saturday night, which, to be honest, the locals were very, very sweet. Very sweet people here. But if you really like this tour, please donate to me. You can see my PayPal link up there. You can also follow me on my socials. I am that guide with glasses. That's my Instagram. It's also my Facebook as well. So follow me on my socials. Again, thanks to St Christopher's Inn for co-hosting with us and for letting all their people know about us. Again, some of the most affordable places in the some of the most affordable accommodation in the city. Here, the Belushi's bar at the bottom is really, really awesome, and I really, really like the one in Prague as well. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer if anyone has any questions. Oh, and we are opened up. Now, if you can make it here to Edinburgh, and even Nikki, who is a local, come on one of our tours. You can actually see me in person doing these tours. Actually, we would to actually see some of your faces as well. And something that I would actually like, if you follow me on Instagram, send me a message. Hey, I was on your tour. I love looking at my face, but I'd love to also see your faces as well. Imagine sleeping all night inside. Yeah, I don't want to imagine that. But thank you all for coming. I'm going to be hanging around for a little bit longer if you have any questions.